everybody. My name is Brad Muniz, a partner at Sobel & Company. I want to welcome you to Sobel Insights. Sobel Insights is a weekly series where we provide some brief information on various topics. Our goal is to keep these sessions to approximately 15 minutes. At this point, we're not offering CPE. If you have any ideas for topics or speakers, please feel free to email me. Our topic today is real estate regulations in the cannabis industry. Our speaker is Jennifer Mazawey. She's a partner at Genova Burns. Now, put aside all the jokes on cannabis. We can say, a bunch of them that's going out there, but I know that this is an extremely hot topic. There is a cultivator that opened up in a couple of towns over from me, and it was just, the neighbors were going crazy. And I figured I should talk with somebody who's in the know about this, and maybe you can explain to us, what are some of the real estate issues other than not in my backyard that arise under cannabis, the cannabis legislation?
Great. Thank you, Brad. And thank you to Sobel for having me today. It's interesting because I am going to talk a little bit about not in my backyard, because I do think that it's an important factor here today. So we're talking about the Cannabis Regulatory Enforcement Assistance and Marketplace Modernization Act. It's a real mouthful, and there's nothing in that title that suggests to you that it has anything to do with real estate. Right. So it was mainly, the main crux of the statute, which is new this year, was really to legalize adult use cannabis and to decriminalize at the same time cannabis. And one of the resultant effects of that is that there have been and there will be more commutations of convictions for drug-related offenses, and a lot to do on the criminal side. And obviously, we're not going to talk about that today. But you look at that law and you say to yourself, well, really, what does this have to do with cannabis, with real estate? But the truth is, it has so much to do with real estate. And we'll start kind of with the basics: location, location, location. Right? Those are the basics of real estate. And there's it's the same here in the cannabis space because we have while we have the fact that it's now legal and adult use is allowed in the state of New Jersey, they have several different license types. I'm not going to go too much into the regulatory today, but there are different types of licenses for the cannabis industry. One being cultivation, one being distribution, another one being retail. And with those come different opportunities for the municipalities in this state to actually regulate those licenses, on either to permit or disallow those licenses. Another topic that's hot in the real estate market, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, has to do with kind of just overall site control and what does that mean. And then ultimately, if you're facing kind of a landlord-tenant situation, what are some of the things you need to be wary of or be thoughtful about when you are deciding, when you're negotiating your lease, when you're talking about the real estate for which you plan on running a cannabis business. So those are kind of, I think, the topics I'd like to cover today. Sure. As it relates to real estate.
Sure. Now, you happen to mention, municipalities and the ability for them to either approve or disallow the uses. And I happen to have sat on a zoning board for 10 years. It was one of my best experiences. You make a lot of people happy. Some people you make sad, but it was really enjoyable. I can imagine these zoning issues are going to be quite significant, related to just in general to the ordinances and then potential variances too.
Absolutely. And that's right now is playing out 100% throughout the state. So the law gave municipalities until August 21st to pass ordinances that either prohibit any or all of those classes of licenses that we talked about, and I gave you only a few, but there's actually 7, or to put reasonable regulations on location, manner, all of the things that go into how a municipality zones generally. So here's why that's such an important date. And if you pick up any newspaper, if anyone's picking up a newspaper these days, or if you're reading it online, daily, you're going to see different municipalities in the state are taking action. They have to take action by August 21st, because if they don't take action by August 21st, they will be deemed to be permitting all of these classes of licenses to operate within their municipalities. So if, Town X does nothing, on August 22nd, a warehouse, a cannabis warehouse, a cannabis distribution, a cannabis cultivator are all going to be considered permitted uses in any industrial zone in that municipality. A cannabis retailer is going to be considered a conditional use permitted in any retail or commercial zone. That's a big deal for a lot of these municipalities. So what we're seeing now, the problem with that, and the problem with the August 21st deadline that we're finding, is that the Cannabis Commission, the state commission that was formed out of the statute as well, has not promulgated its regulations fully. So towns are feeling concerned. They don't know how this is actually going to play out. And so even though 2/3 of the citizens of the state of New Jersey voted in favor of making cannabis legal, you're not going to find 2/3 of the municipalities saying yes to allowing cannabis businesses in their communities. It's just not shaking out that way. And part of it is because they're so worried about that August 21st deadline that they'd rather say no and then opt in later if they get more information that makes them feel like they want to or can really have those kinds of businesses. And I've neglected to mention that if they don't act by August 21st, those uses are automatically permitted for a 5-year period. So basically you're locked into 5-year zoning on these types of issues if you don't do anything by August 21st. Why it's very critical for them to be moving.
So they're trying to govern without guidance. So they're going to probably be conservative, not playing politics. They're going to be conservative and say, you know what, let's say no, and we can always allow it afterwards rather than being locked in for 5 years.
We are seeing that. Now, there are lots of towns where we are also seeing them take really progressive stances. Some to name a few. Bayonne was one of the first ones that passed an ordinance that did allow, and they are limiting the number of licenses that they're going to be allowing. Patterson is in the news these days because they are looking to actually allow a large number of licenses. I don't think that ordinance has passed, but they're having discussions about it at this point. Jersey City is also in the midst of their discussions, and they're not going to limit the number of licenses. They're going to limit where things are permitted, but they are not going to limit the actual number of licenses.
Interesting.
New Brunswick is going to limit the number and the location, but also allowing both on the retail side and on the more industrial uses, that cultivation, that warehouse, that distribution. Those are some to name a few. And then there's a lot of towns that are still considering it, but they're running out of time. We have just a little bit over a month for them to act. And remember, or if you don't know, in order to pass an ordinance, a municipality has to have 2 readings. They have to have a public hearing. There has to be a period of time between first reading and second reading, whereby they provide notice to the interested public so that they can come and weigh in on whether or not they agree with the zoning that's being proposed. So it's very important. That's kind of happened. Like I said, it's happening right now, and that's really critical. And why that is important, obviously, or the first reason why that's important is because you're going to need to show, in order to get a license, you're going to need to show that you have municipal support, and you're ultimately going to have to show that you have appropriate zoning for your cannabis business. Now, other things that you can do to kind of garner that support, this is a little bit off of the zoning piece, but still kind of in the midst of that overall site approval aspect, is, I tell clients really get involved very early in the process with the community. So many municipalities, many towns have community groups or community organizations that are very active. And so to the extent that you want to become a part of that community, you should do that before you go in with the site plan approval, application for your cannabis related business, because you want to understand what are the concerns, what are the things that the community is thinking about, and how can you help them meet those concerns or deal with those concerns with your business. So I recommend very much kind of getting involved with not only the town municipal officials, but also with the community groups that are involved, because I do think that goes a long way to showing the municipal support and puts you in a better position when it's actually time to go get your license.
I say it all the time. I don't care. We're talking cannabis here. You could talk anything. You should always be partnering with the community. Build
And it,
relations.
absolutely.
Because without that, you're just sowing this relationship where people don't know anything. They start questioning things. It's never good that way.
Yeah, and listen, I don't believe that community engagement means that the community gets to dictate how your
No.
business is run.
Right.
It's a very different concept. To me, what I'm talking about is really talking with and listening. More important, listening, because oftentimes people want to be heard. They
Yep.
want to know that you understand what their concern is and that you've got a plan for it. It doesn't mean that you're going to give them what they want. It just means that you understand the issues and that you're ready to face them with the business that you're bringing in.
That's great advice. Ezra, because you covered site control, I appreciate that. If they're interested in leasing, what particular aspects should the lessee consider when talking with the landlord, and even more importantly, I guess, what certain aspects should a landlord consider when talking with the prospective tenant?
Sure. I'm going to take a little step back because to get your approval from a municipal planning board, you don't have to own the site. You could actually be a lessee of the site. You can own the site. You can have an option to purchase the site. So there are lots of ways to kind of get that site control. If you're not the owner, you need consent of your landowner to go get that site plan approval. And I think you're going to find that different businesses want to handle the site control differently. As you pointed out, sometimes you're going to buy, sometimes you're going to be an option to buy, and other times you're going to be a lease. And things that might be important in making that determination are funds and funding. How are you going to get your money? Because what I want to point out is while New Jersey has now permitted cannabis as a legal substance, the feds, it's still an illegal substance under the federal law. So traditional banking, not going to be an option. You're not going to be able to get a mortgage for a property like this that you plan on using in all likelihood, because you're not going to be able to meet the covenants that you're going to be required to provide in such a transaction. You may have issues with title insurance. You may also have issues with regular insurance on the property. So cannabis insurance is actually a real burgeoning industry because there are now insurers that are they're going to be willing to take on that risk. It's going to be probably a different business line for insurance companies going forward. But those are some of those like big ticket things that really get concerned about or need to be thinking about when you're talking about site control. So let's assume instead you decide to have a lease, as you pointed out, because dollars and cents, it makes more sense. You don't have to go get a big loan. There are private funding mechanisms, private funding organizations, REITs, and those kinds of organizations that will fund on a cannabis business, even if you can't get it from a traditional lender, right? But so let's assume you decided you want to lease your facility. Some of the things that if you need to be thinking about are whether or not the landlord, I guess, is thinking about this. Do they have some kind of incentive, some kind of federal tax incentive or grant that might get impacted by bringing you on as a tenant? So something that a landlord really has to be thinking about. Also has to be thinking about its own mortgage obligation and whether they would be violating any covenants that they've entered into if they in fact bring in a cannabis business as a tenant. Another thing might be a prohibition. If it's a multi-tenanted building, you might have limits as a landlord on what other type of business you could bring in. If someone had already some kind of smoke shop that's not cannabis related, but perhaps sells paraphernalia and cigarettes and cigars and things like that, but is not a retail facility for cannabis, they may have a provision in their lease that prohibits the landlord from bringing a like-kind business. That you may also have prohibitions from a daycare center, for instance, that they do not want some kind of sin business that to enter into. So you really have to look at what your current documents say if you're a landlord and how you're going to be impacted by potentially leasing to a cannabis tenant. If you're a potential cannabis tenant, you really want to be talking in your negotiations about, is my lease conditioned on my getting the license? Because you have to show site control when you submit for your license. But what happens if you don't get the license and you're locked into a 5-year lease in a warehouse facility that you now have no use for? So if you're a tenant, you're going to be wanting to look for things like conditional tenancy, something you're going to want to be concerned about if you're let's say you have a consumption area, because cannabis consumption in a retail setting is permitted in certain circumstances. You're going to want to make sure that your landlord has adequate air filtration, or that they're going to allow you to make tenant improvements that provide for that.
Right.
Kind of flipping back to the landlord for a minute too, you have to be concerned about nuisance by your other tenants as well for things like consumption areas. I guess that's kind of what I wanted to talk about on the landlord-tenant side. I want to go back to something on the federal versus state as well, just for a quick second, because they have decriminalized cannabis, it's no longer subject to the drug-free school zones in New Jersey, so that there is no longer going to be a state-mandated requirement that cannabis facilities be 1,000 feet from a school. But as you're looking for a site, beware of your local ordinance, because they can put requirements on it that you be X amount of feet from a public building, from a daycare center, again, getting to that multi-tenanted building scenario, schools, et cetera. So that, I just wanted to kind of, as a practice pointer, put that out there, even though I know I was kind of beyond that section.
So we're just over the 15 minutes. I'm going to ask you for if you can give me one prediction as to what you think may happen. This is a tough one. It
is. So I think that once the Cannabis Commission releases their regulations, that the more robust regulations, they have submitted some, you're going to see municipalities going back and revisiting a lot of the denials or the straight out no's for their facilities, because they're going to want to realize the tax impact. They're going to want to realize the tax and tax benefits of having cannabis facilities within their borders. So I think we're going to see some changes over the course of the next year, in particular, those that voted no, to come back and maybe reconsider and add some of those cannabis facilities into their zoning.
Great. So I want to thank you, Jennifer, for going over this information, and for all the people that are viewing this. If you have any questions, you see, we just scratched the surface on this, and Jennifer spoke really fast to try and give you as much information as possible. It's deep. I recommend that you reach out to Jennifer at Genova Burns. That we've known the firm for years. They're extremely tied into the state of New Jersey and the community, and reach out to them and let them give you the proper guidance. Don't reach out to an accountant to give you guidance on this area. I may look like an attorney, but I'm not one, okay?
But there are plenty of opportunities for you to reach out to your accountant too, for sure.
Yes. So thank you very much, and thank you very much, everybody, for attending.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay.